Have 4:30. Do you all have 4:30? Great. Thanks. Right. Welcome everybody to our District of Tofino regular council meeting for Tuesday, June 23rd. I will call our meeting to order for 4:30 p.m. and excuse me, recognize that we are meeting today in the traditional territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, although we do have one councillor joining us from the east coast of the island in Coast Salish territory. And I will also just note to everybody that today's meeting is being recorded and we will be posting it on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. I will ask now, please, for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Law, and seconded by, I think that was Councillor McQuaid. All in favor? Thank you, that's everybody, and the motion is carried. Next, we will look at the meeting minutes from the regular council meeting that was held June 9th and consider adoption. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
Moved.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Chalmers, seconded by Councillor McMaster. Were there any errors or omissions noted in the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. And then we have minutes from the special council meeting that was held on June 15th, 2020 for adoption.
I'll move adoption.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any errors or omissions noted in those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you, everybody. Motion is carried. So we did have somebody sign up for the public comment on agenda items. And so Elise will unmute Eileen Floody, and she is able to speak for 2 minutes. Eileen, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone's smiling faces, and I won't take long. It's 8.6. Of course, it's about the development on DL 114. I think we're all ready to see that go ahead. I'd just like to emphasize on behalf of all the tree huggers in Tofino and area that we really like to see that be the limit of the development there. I know all of the DL 114 reading the things that are subject to development, but it would be great if that development as it's currently planned be the limit and the remainder of the forest be left intact. And on that note, it would be, we're still waiting on a tree bylaw, which I know was on Council's agenda last year, at least, if not before that. And all the information that we've gathered as a group in Tofino that's all been submitted to Mr. Rogers, and I really hope that there can be some progress on that before things change again and development causes rapid tree loss in our community. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eileen, and thank you for being the first member of the public to use the Q&A function and to participate remotely like this. It's great to see that it can be done, and I thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to move on into delegations, and we do have Ian Scott he's the Executive Director of the Tofino Housing Corporation, to speak to the zoning amendment application at DL 114 and the letter that is on our agenda today. And Robin Petrie from Community Catalyst Society is joining him as well, Catalyst Community Development Society. So I think Ian has a presentation, and
hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
So Ian, you do have a presentation, right?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I think you should be able to share the screen. Great.
Do you see the screen share?
Yes, I see a black screen.
Your screen sharing is being paused. Lovely
Okay.
technology. Let me try that again.
That's fine, no problem.
If it doesn't work the second time, then we will simply revert to the old-fashioned way.
Aha, that's great. Now you just need to start your slideshow and it should be great. Perfect. Terrific. Take it away.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks again for having me as part of this somewhat different council meeting. A pleasure to be here, and I believe Robin Petrie, the Vice President of Development from Catalyst Community Development Society, is also on the line. We're not going to speak too much to the second reading issue of DO 114. We just have a couple brief comments, and then we'll be available to take any questions if necessary. So the main focus of my presentation is on our request for council to transfer the balance of the proceeds of the Sea Otter sale, and then also to authorize the initiation of the selling of the Gateway one-bedroom unit in a similar process to Sea Otter. You know, I'm here, of course, because of the housing need. That's why THC was formed, why I came on board, why we then selected the Catalyst Community Development Society. And this is an example of an email that I received just the other day. Somebody living in Yuki would rather be in Tofino, single parent with a child attending daycare in Tofino and working full-time at the location in Tofino. I get those kind of emails every once in a while, and I'm sure you get comments from your constituents, as well as bumping into people in the grocery store. And of course, at first reading, we heard some of those stories from individuals who took time to come and speak. The housing need is long-standing in Tofino and challenging for many people. The other reason we're here is because perpetually affordable housing is not easy to build and has not been provided by the private market. And that's not just in Tofino, but that's in communities across the country. And so what that has meant over the decades, and a bit of a pause, to be honest, in terms of provincial and federal investments, is co-op housing, nonprofit housing, run by both big and small nonprofit organizations. And now the provincial and federal government are investing billions into affordable housing. But at the same time, local government investment is critical to its success and really key to attracting that provincial and federal funding. Like other issues you deal with, affordable housing is one of those where those levels of government like to see local participation, both from a financial point of view, but then on the regulatory side. The district owns and created the Housing Corporation, as you know, and we, as the corporation, selected Catalyst Community Development Society through a process considering a number of different options as our builder and operator. And why did we do that? They're an experienced nonprofit with properties and operations in various communities. They bring that experience to the table, but they also bring they're taking on some risks on our behalf, but also buffering against some of the risks, given the fact that Tofino is such a small place. And so we've been working diligently with them through the pre-development phases on both Sharp Road and DL 114. Sharp Road, as you know, the land has been transferred to THC, and we've now gone ahead and signed a 60 to 100-year lease with Catalyst. That's on the public record, and it provides THC an option to purchase. So if, as an organization, as we evolve, we decide that running the housing ourselves makes more sense, we have that option. And the lease also looks at operational surpluses and the kind of investments that the district and THC have collectively made in the project, and allows us to do one of two things. One, reduce rents to better serve the community if we feel that's the right decision at the time, or to get some of those investments paid out and be able to pay that forward into other affordable housing projects. So looking at kind of where we are financially to date, the district, through amenity housing reserves, including the first transfer of some of the proceeds of the Sea Otter sale, and then the MRDT online accommodation tax, has provided about 29% of our funding to date, combined with the resources that THC and Catalyst have brought to the table. Another 28% of that is grants that we and Catalyst have secured, and the remaining 40+% is through loans, again, secured both by the district and secured both by THC, and in the case of our loan, that loan has been backed by the district, and then Catalyst has recently secured a pre-development loan backed by the lease on Sharp Road. And if we project forward to the capital development phase, what it means is both the land, so the value of the land going into these projects, as well as the financial contributions that THC and the district are making collectively, that about roughly, and this is not, you can't quote this number, it won't be exactly this, but close, 14% of the total Sharp Road costs are provided by THC and the district, and the other, and for DL 114, that percent is a little bit lower. The remainder then is other grants coming from federal and provincial government, as well as debt servicing, and some equity investment by Catalyst themselves. So Sharp Road, I think we've reported to you already that we were prioritized as a co-investment project, and we expect a letter of intent soon. That's a process that Catalyst is managing. They asked for a $468,000 grant, and that letter of intent letter, which is probably about 3 or 4 weeks away, will confirm what that grant number looks like. But on the cost side, all the work seems to be panning out, and we're pretty confident that that project's going to come out of the ground in the early fall of this year with that CMHC confirmation. On DL 114, our target at this point is the recently announced September 4th intake for construction-ready projects with the Community Housing Fund. If both apartment buildings were funded, that would be about a $7.8 million capital grant and an annual subsidy to support the much lower rents that we're able to achieve through the Community Housing Fund of about $250,000 plus. There's a lot of factors that go into the size of that subsidy, so it's going to vary, and there's still a lot of things to resolve before that number is definitively known. But to get into that September 4th intake, we need to have a rezone site, a development permit issued or close, building permit submitted or to be ready submitted within 3 months. We need a construction duration of 20 months. We need to confirm the tenure of the property. For example, a lease being in place with Catalyst. We need a consultant team selected and a construction manager selected or construction method identified. So we can meet all those criteria. We may not have the subdivision and the land transferred in a way that we can sign the lease with Catalyst by September 4th, but we will certainly have a draft in place that all parties have agreed to. So that's the context of the request, which is that we're asking for that transfer of the $65,000 from the Sea Otter sale. That's the remainder after those initial contributions were made to THC. And it's because our MRDT funding has been interrupted by COVID-19. Last year we got $274,000. After COVID hit, we have budgeted for $160,000, so about 60% of last year's revenues, understanding that the bulk of those bookings and activity is through June through September. But at this point, we won't know how much more money we're going to get beyond the initial $47,000 we received early in the year until September, with the delay in the remittances. And so we're asking for this transfer now so we can keep going, and in particular, work towards that September 4th intake. And then also, this seems like a good opportunity and a good time to initiate the sale of the Gateway 1-bedroom unit, similar to the Sea Otter process, which will help replenish those capital reserves. We may need to request some of those capital funds to help with the capital funding for DL 114. In particular, if we ended up only getting funding for one of the apartment buildings and need to phase it into a 2-phase build. And I think also there's the other benefit of releasing additional housing at this time through the COVID-19 recovery. That's all I want to say on those 2 items, and of course happy to take questions. With respect to rezoning of the land, we're supportive of the second reading being approved and proceeding to public hearing. In terms of any of the issues, we're just going to let you have that discussion with staff, but do want to highlight that we're certainly, after further discussion with staff and understanding the issue, willing to commit today to providing a 1.8 meter path and sidewalk on the new road within our planned 18-meter right-of-way. We understand from staff they see ways to achieve that, and we're happy to work with them on those design details as we work through the subdivision process. And with that, I'll exit my presentation, and Robin and I are willing to take any questions. I don't know, do we get to go on screen, or are we an invisible presence in your meeting?
I believe that you are an invisible presence, but we can certainly hear your voice. So, okay, thanks very much. All right, so Council, does anybody have any questions for Ian and Robin? Councillor Steer.
Hi, thank you, and appreciate the presentation once again. I understand that the reserve contributions, you know, that we're not getting from MRDT, and the request for the 65,000 is so that you can continue on with the projects. And there was, I believe, 6 of them listed in the letter. And I'm curious, is there a budget associated with those projects so that I can understand where that money will be used, and if the projects, and I know that there was also some restrictions on the use of that money, and I think it was listed here that there was restrictions on the reserve spending, and if those projects met that criteria for the restrictions. I do have a further question on the gateway sale, but if you could, maybe we'll start with that one and move on.
So I'm just pulling up the 2020 THC budget. I won't share it on the screen because it'll get a bit confusing. So we have a certain amount of money still left over from MRDT from this year and last year. And so we would use that money for any expenditures that are not eligible to be, that don't fit into the capital reserve category. So I did list a number of projects, and not all of those would be eligible for the 65,000. But by getting that 65,000, we would be able to continue with all those different things. When it comes to our year this year, we have a budget of about 500,000. 40-odd thousand of that is on Sharp Road. 440-odd thousand of that is on DL 114. The bulk of our expenses on DL 114 have been through the beginning of the year as we work through the remainder of our commitments to the Rural Dividend Fund. And so that was quite a significant amount of work with all our various consultants: architect, structural engineer, electrical engineer, building envelope consultant, and Catalyst guiding that work. And so we're at the point now where those funds have been expended, and we need those additional funds to continue on completing the rezoning process, and then getting into the into the subdivision process and land transfer process as well. So I hope that answers your question in sufficient detail.
Yes, thank you, Ian. I appreciate the answer. I just have, issues in terms of the costing of the project so far, and I just want, in the interest of accountability and transparency, I'm just interested in having those types of budget conversations and where those funds will be allocated to. Thank you. In regards to the gateway sale, I do have some, I guess, concerns. Within the letter that was sent, there were some questions about the uncertainty around the phasing and around the funding formula. You're still working out many of those issues. There are tentative plans on the duplex sites and how those might incur to help pay and offset the financing. So at this time, my personal opinion is I do believe it's premature to liquidate that gateway unit asset at this time. And so there's a little more certainty around the financing questions that still were left out in the open. So I would have difficulties in supporting the sale at this time until I had a little more further information about where we're going in terms of the budgeting process for the continued development of these lots. It's just a comment, no need for answer, but thank you once again for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. Councillor Law?
I'd just like to echo Councillor Steer's comments and observations. I just want to point out that in our budget process, I felt I was able to access the municipal budget line by line, and it gave me a great sense of confidence in our financial decisions. And I really would like the same confidence working with THC and Catalyst in those decisions. So I do echo Councillor Steers. I would like to see a similar breakdown of the budget and cost, just so we know for sure what we're putting our money to, exactly where it's going, and why. Essentially, so that you know, I'm not a developer, so that any third party, you know, a reasonable third party could look and say, yeah, this is reasonable to make these decisions. So I just want to echo that. And I do think along the similar lines of Councillor Steer about Gateway, I would really like to see a little more of the budget before something. That's my opinion on that. So thank you, Ian, for doing all this work. I do appreciate the move for affordable housing here.
Thank you, Councillor Law. And we will have an opportunity as council to discuss these questions when we get to the next agenda item. Are there any questions for Ian that remain? Councillor Anderson.
Maybe this is not a question for Ian, it might be for staff, but I do recall, and perhaps Councillor McMaster would recall, we did have a motion a long time ago to sell the Gateway, and I don't know if we just didn't act on that motion or if we revoked it or if I'm imagining it. So I thought there was quite a housing committee for a while that the recommendation came out of that committee, went to council to sell the Gateway. So I thought that motion happened already. So I don't know if anyone can answer right now, but that's my recollection of it.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I'm not too sure we are able to answer that right now either. Is this prior? I don't recall that in my time, but maybe or is it the housing committee that existed about 6-7 years ago?
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Councillor McMaster.
I think that came from the previous housing committee, and it went to was a recommendation from the committee to council, but I don't think it was ever acted upon by council because then we changed everything.
Okay, thanks for that. Yes, and it is because the unit is owned by the District of Tofino. It is up to the council to make the appropriate motions to authorize the sale of a unit like that. Okay, are there any other questions for Ian? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on.
Am I allowed to answer one of those comments?
Oh, of course, yeah, go right ahead.
So I would just say a couple things to Councillor Steer and Councillor Law's comments just to keep in mind. One is there is certainly a process involved and a time period involved in terms of being able to sell the unit, and you know it's currently vacant, and so now would be a decent time to do that. That said, you know, if that decision is delayed, I'm sure we can work with that. The other thing, and happy to provide some more information on budgets, is to know in terms of the affordable housing development process that any of our applications to BC Housing or CMHC go through you know, quite an extensive vetting process through all the legal documentation, budgets, all those kind of things. And those are done by folks who work in that field day after day. And if we don't meet their expectations in terms of proper financial management and expenditures, we won't get approved. And so I know that's not you making that decision, but it is, hopefully gives you some comfort that you know, that is being done. And you know, as we go through a development process, you know, it is front-ended by a certain number of soft costs for all those engineers and architects and those kind of things that are required to get a project to fully construction ready, and then you incur your capital costs. And so, you know, 10 to 15% of the budget, depending on the project, is in that soft cost category. So just wanted to add those couple comments to the mix.
Thank you. Okay.
Is it time for some motions, or do we
Well, let us get, I think we'll move on now. Thank you for that, Ian. And now we'll move into the correspondence. And so let us deal directly then with these two requests. So the two requests before us are around the release of the funds from the capital reserve to, and essentially, as Ian has explained it, assist with a cash flow issue. That is the intention of that capital reserve. And if anybody has any questions for Nyla about the way restricted reserve funds can be used, she certainly can answer those questions. And then the second issue is the matter of the sale of the Gateway unit. And I would add this at the outset, after hearing Councillor Steer and Law, that we do not need to authorize the sale today, but what I would like Council to consider is initiating the process where staff will come back and explain what the process is for selling. So some of us on Council have been through this process before with the Sea Otter unit, so we're very familiar with the way the housing agreement is developed. A lottery process is used, and the Tofino Housing Corporation managed the process for the District of Tofino in the sale of the Sea Otter unit as a price restricted, resident restricted unit. And that the vision would be that this would be done in a very similar sense. So an authorization today or a request for Council to consider directing staff to begin preparing that would be timely. As Ian explained, there is some delay in this process, so it's not a final decision that's made for today. And that, you know, there's an opportunity to answer a few of these other questions and deal with some of these issues that have been raised. So on the matter of the transfer of the funds from the capital reserve, were there any questions, specific questions about that, or were there any? Then Councillor McMaster, I think you could go ahead and make a motion if you like.
Okay. Staff be authorised to prepare an amendment to District of Tofino 2020-2024 financial plan bylaw to allow for an expenditure equal to the balance of proceeds from the sale of the Sea Otter unit to be funded from the Capital Works Reserve, and that these funds be transferred to the Tofino Housing Corporation under an agreement to ensure that the funds be spent in accordance with the Capital Works Reserve Fund bylaw. Finally, Tofino Council directs staff to prepare a report for Council with the appropriate motions to initiate the sale of the Gateway unit as a price-restricted, resident-restricted housing unit.
Thank you. So we'll consider the first one first. And is there a seconder for the motion?
A second.
Thank you, Councillor McQuaid. Okay, so on the matter, this is just the matter of the transfer. Everybody is understanding of the motion. Are there any questions about it? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, the question stems, as we know, that there is a board of directors at the Tofino Housing Corporation and tasked with kind of the oversight of that corporation. And I'm just curious as to if the Tofino Housing Corporation board of directors has had discussions about this particular issue and what their recommendations regarding this might be. I don't know if that can be spoken to here.
Certainly can.
Thank you.
No, these matters are discussed in great detail by the Housing Corporation Board, and the letter that has come forward from Ian today that's on our agenda essentially comes from the Housing Corporation Board. So this is, as we've discussed and been, you know, every meeting there's a discussion around budgets and project financing and updates and where things are at. And then this is in part because of COVID-19 and the effect on MRDT, the changes to cash flow. This is the result of our last board meeting, and this is the recommendation that came forward. These are recorded in the minutes of the corporation, and today you see the letter before you. So the answer is yes. Are there any other questions about the motion or comments about the motion? Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. The motion is carried. So Councillor McMaster, sorry, could you read again your second motion?
Yeah, the second motion is these funds be transferred to the Tofino Housing Corporation under an agreement to ensure that the funds be spent in accordance with the Capital Works Reserve Fund bylaw.
Oh, that's the one we just did. Sorry, the one on the sale.
The third part.
Yeah.
The Tofino Council directs staff to prepare a report for Council with the appropriate motions to initiate the sale of the Gateway unit as a price-restricted, resident-restricted housing unit.
Thank you.
Second that.
Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. So just to comment that this would initiate a process, and so that especially for our new members of council, you could understand better what the process is that this would enable, but we're not making a decision to actually sell the unit today. Are there any questions on the motion? Councillor Steer, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Osborne. I know it might be redundant. Could you explain once again the intent of this motion is we are not making a decision about selling it, are we initiating the process going forward, or we're preparing a report?
Correct.
Back to council to tell us how this is going to go.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And then we will make a decision regarding the actual sale of it at another time.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
I'm just wondering, this is to replenish the reserves for housing. And I'm wondering, after the transfer of the $65,000, does that leave anything in that reserve? Or are we sort of depleting that?
I would maybe refer this to Nyla. Thank you.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Yeah, that reserve fund is called our Capital Works Reserve Fund, and there are several different ways that funds will be transferred into that reserve, and one of them is the disposition of land and improvements, or land or improvements. So when we disposed of the Sea Otter unit, the proceeds of the sale that were not transferred to the Tofino Housing Corporation were transferred into that Capital Works Reserve. And so we can only expend those funds in the manner that have been included in the Capital Works Reserve Fund bylaw, which have to do with purchase of more land and improvements or capital works or capital projects. There are other sources of funds that get transferred into that reserve. So the balance of that reserve fund is not specific to housing, and it won't be used specific to housing. There are other amounts such as capital and infrastructure levy, a portion of that gets transferred into there and will be expended in that manner.
Thank you. Any other questions about the motion or comments on the motion? Elise?
Can I just hear it one more time? And I know I could listen to the recording. There's just a few words in the motion that are a little confusing to me, so I'd like to make sure that I get them right before I record it. And the word that I'm sort of a little stuck on is the word motion within the motion.
Okay.
Are you looking for motions to be brought forward as in proposed resolutions or recommendations, or are you using motions as in the steps to be taken?
I think it's the steps to be taken. So maybe that's a way we should replace that.
Thank you. I will replace that. And then my other question is just whether council wishes to have the intention of the sale of this property to replenish the Capital Works Fund. Is that the intent that staff would bring forward a report to that effect?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I might include that also in the motion.
Okay. So let me see if I've got this correct, because I want it to be very clear. And I'm reading off my screen here. So it would be that Tofino Council direct staff to prepare a report for council on the steps to initiate the sale of the Gateway unit as a price restricted resident restricted housing unit in order to replenish the capital reserve. Sorry, I didn't get that name quite right, but
Capital Works Reserve. That works for me. I may just switch a word or two in there, that staff be authorized.
That's actually authorized too. Okay. Thank you. Is everybody clear? There's any questions? No, I'm seeing nodding heads. Okay. Sorry about the messiness of that. That's part of the sausage making. All right. Are there any other questions about the motion or comments on the motion? Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. That's everybody. And the motion is carried. All right, thank you everybody for that. Moving on, our second item of correspondence today is from the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust, and there is a copy of their annual report. Did anybody have any comments or questions that arose from that? It's great to see. I thought it was really well done. very clear, and really nice to see the highlight of different partnerships that the CBT has been forming over the years. Okay, then we'll move on. And our first presentation today, our report is around the allocation of council grant funds and the $5,000 that previously had been requested by council to be transferred or to be used as a emergency preparedness, neighborhood preparedness. And we have a bit of a change, slight change in direction. Nyla, did you want to speak to this at all? No. I mean, it's pretty clear in the report, but
yeah, there is no presentation on the report. So but myself or Laura are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions about this? No. Okay. Great idea then. Would somebody like to make the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Chalmers.
I'll move that the council grant funds set aside for the Neighbours Emergency Preparedness Grants in the amount of up to $5,000 be transferred to the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust to be administered through the Responsive Neighbourhood Small Grants Program.
Thank you. Moved it and seconded by Councillor McMaster. Were there any comments about this? Any final questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, I think Peter is up, and our first DVP today, development variance permit, is for the Crosby residence at 1048 Campbell Street. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have a whole slew of reports coming up, so I will try and get them all in order here. We're going to start with the Crosby DVP. All right, so we should be up and running now. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. This is a development variance permit for 1048 Campbell Street, applied by Mr. Crosby. So this is development variance permit. This is our third of the year. We'll be looking to vary both the District of Tofino zoning bylaw as well as the subdivision and development control bylaw. There's two things that we're considering with regards to this development variance permit. One is to reduce the minimum required side yard setback in an RA2 zone, and the other is to waive the 10% parcel frontage minimum for the proposed panhandle lot. So this development variance permit is required as part of a subdivision that has been actually a couple of years in the making. This property was considered for rezoning a few years ago, and since that's happened, staff have been working with the applicant to move through the subdivision process. So this is one of the important steps that they will need to take in order to complete that. This is the location, 1048 Campbell Street, or kind of Pacific Rim Highway. It sort of turns into Pacific Rim Highway, I think, officially on the maps, right around that area. And here's a brief kind of site plan indicating sort of the two different variances that we're considering with this application. You can see the shed that's within the sort of red cloud. That shed currently is outside of our required minimum yard setback, but should the subdivision proceed and proceed as intended, it will be within the side yard setback of the new lot. And so we need to address that at this point prior to finalization of the subdivision. And then the other part of this this development variance permit is the panhandle. So that's this kind of area of the proposed subdivision. We actually have a stipulation within our subdivision and development control bylaw that notes that any new parcel created must have at least 10% of its perimeter fronting on the adjacent highway. This panhandle indicates that that new parcel that's being created, proposed lot B, will not meet that 10% requirement. So we're looking to waive that requirement. So looking at the development variance permit from sort of the general criteria that we use to evaluate them, considering the form and character of the existing neighborhood area, there won't actually be any physical change to the property as a result of this variance. It's more of a technical consideration with regards to the subdivision. And then with regards to the protection and preservation of natural features and functions, again, there's not really much of a change as a result of the variance. The panhandle is necessary should direct access to the rear lot be needed at some point in the future. Currently, the applicant is proposing to access both lots by easement, and that easement is partially on the panhandle and partially on what will be proposed lot A. staff are supportive of that easement in that it will not require further clearing. However, there is the potential for maybe years down the road where that easement is no longer tenable, and it's important to have that panhandle there to ensure that access to the eastern lot remains. And then regarding citing solar exposure considerations, there won't be any changes as a result of the variance. With respect to privacy, again, no physical or material changes to the property. Same with views. And then with regards to flexibility in the building design, basically the citing and these variances will allow the subdivision as it has been proposed for the last couple of years. Essentially, staff feel that it will have minimal impact on neighboring properties as there will be no material change to the lot. Comments were solicited from neighbors through the notification process as well. That notification happened on June 12th. One phone call was received by staff. It wasn't necessarily for or against the application. It was more just looking for some information. Staff are recommending approval. Other options could be refusing the application or deferring the application. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to speak to them.
Thank you very much, Peter. Are there any questions about this DVP application? Okay. Councillor Law.
I was going to make a motion.
Go right ahead.
That motion that council approve development variance permit number 0320 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 for Lot 2, District Lot 122, C Crown Grant 190711 something. Looks like an I.
You can skip straight to the Tla-o-qui-aht District Plan part.
Okay, Tla-o-qui-aht District Plan VIP 68981 as follows. Vary Part 19.6.2 to the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 to reduce the minimum required side yard setback for an accessory building to an RA2 zone from 4.5 meters to 1.94 meters as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0320. And B, vary Part 21 of the District of Tofino Subdivision and Development Control Bylaw number 1201/2014 to permit a frontage of less than 10% of the parcel perimeter as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0320.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. There's a seconder. Any questions about this DVP? All right. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. All right, Peter, back to you.
Yes, so the next one we'll be considering is the Sear subdivision, or Sear, pardon me, development variance permit. So this development variance permit application applies to the property at 1282 Lynn Road. So this is number 0620. We didn't quite get them lined up on the agenda. We're just varying the District of Tofino zoning bylaw for this one. We're looking to reduce the minimum required front yard in an RA1 zone from, I believe, 12.2 to 9.2 meters. Essentially, the applicant has been interested in siting a caretaker's cottage on the property, and they were wanting to push it a little bit further closer to Lynn Road in order to retain some of the existing parking and not have to take down further vegetation to accommodate extra parking associated with the caretaker's cottage on the property. So the location of the property, 1282 Lynn Road, it's approximately halfway down Lynn Road away from the water, so that would be on the eastern side. Here's a site plan that's been provided by the applicant. You can see where the proposed dwelling is. This is going to be a modular home, is my understanding, that will be brought in. It'll be one story, I think about 13 to 14 feet in height. It will be, originally it was intended to be sited where you can see it on the actual plan. However, since that time, the applicant has spent a bit more time thinking about how the parking and everything's going to flow within the lot, and has asked for this variance to site the proposed dwelling a little bit closer towards Lynn Road. Again, looking at some of the criteria regarding the form and character of the neighborhood, many of the other properties in the area have single-family homes and caretakers' cottages. Based on the proposed dwelling, the height, as well as the fact that there is a considerable fence along Lynn Road, staff aren't really aren't really of the opinion that the proposed reduction in minimum front lot line setback will have a significant impact to neighboring properties or the public realm. Regarding the protection, preservation, of natural features on the lot, one of the primary rationales, at least in my understanding, for applying for the variance has to do with looking to retain some of the vegetation on the lot. This siting just seems to work a little bit better in order to provide a location for the structure as well as for the required parking associated with it. And then considering solar exposure, it shouldn't really make a big difference. Perhaps as the structure is a little bit closer to Lynn Road, there may be slightly more solar exposure as the roadway is fairly clear. However, staff anticipate that it's fairly equal across the lot. Respect to privacy to neighboring properties, we're not looking at varying the side yard setbacks, and hopefully there'll be very little intrusion into neighboring properties' privacy. And with regards to the public realm, as it is a fairly low profile structure, we don't feel that it'll be very imposing on the public realm either. When considering views from neighboring properties, essentially it shouldn't have any effect on views necessarily. It'll probably be noticeable for the property to the north, but again, it's a one-story structure conforming to the required side yard setback, so it should not be an issue in staff's opinion. And then with regards to flexibility in building design, there may be some slight design changes to the actual structure, but the siting will be fairly locked in by this development variance permit. And I believe there was one phone call related to this development variance permit. The notification, as with the others, went out on June 12th. Again, the phone call noted that there had been some vegetation removal on the property since the new owners have taken possession of the property. And they were also just looking for clarification, although they did not note that they were opposed to the variance in any way. Staff recommend approval of the variance. Again, other options would be refusing the application or deferring the application to a later. And if you have any questions or comments about this one in particular, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, any questions? Yes, Councillor Law.
Just a quick question, Peter. Thank you for this. Just to clarify, this variance applies to this structure. So if things were to change, structure changed, it would change the variance request.
Yeah, that's correct. That's why when you're reading the staff recommendations, they're so long is because they're a little bit painful to read, but they need to be quite specific to the exact thing that's being proposed. So yeah, if we were looking at a different structure, different footprint, it'd be a different process.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Just a quick question, Peter. So I really appreciate that the applicant in one way is doing this because they don't want to remove more vegetation to fit within a setback, but there are no guarantees, are there, that more vegetation wouldn't or couldn't be removed by this owner or a future owner?
No, that's correct. Yeah, we have no existing covenants on the lot that prevents vegetation removal. And as was mentioned earlier in this meeting and has been mentioned many times, we currently do not have a vegetation removal bylaw or a tree removal bylaw. So on private property, the landowner does have the right to remove vegetation as they see fit. And I understand that it's sometimes a little bit difficult to use that as a significant rationale when there's no guarantee. So. Yeah, definitely something to consider.
Yeah, no, I concur. It's not a rationale, but that's okay. I can still consider the application without thinking about that. So I appreciate that clarification though. Any other questions? All right. Would somebody like to make the motion?
I'll move that council approve development variance permit number 0620 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 7701997 for lot 6, district lot 132, Tla-o-qui-aht District Plan 49362 as follows. Vary part 18.6.1 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to reduce the minimum front yard setback in an RA1 zone from 12.2 meters to 9.2
2 meters for the proposed structure as shown in Exhibit A to Development Variance Permit number 0620.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Law. Any final comment or question? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And Peter.
All right, so this is our last development variance permit to consider for this particular meeting. This one will be for 895 Mosier Place, which is adjacent to Rosie Bay, or part of the Rosie Bay development. Again, looking to vary the District of the Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997. We're basically considering increasing the maximum footprint for a caretaker's cottage from 70 square meters to 90.1 square meters. Caretakers' cottages are permitted to have garages on the ground floor. However, if there is going to be any habitable part to the structure, particularly on the second floor, if it's going to be a suite above the garage, it's still considered a caretaker's cottage, and so they still need to conform to the maximum lot coverage or maximum footprint that we allow in the zoning bylaw. So that is 70 square meters, or approximately 750 square feet. However, this applicant is looking to create a larger garage on the ground floor and then have a 750 square meter, or pardon me, 750 square foot suite above that. There were some plans attached to the development variance permit that was part of the staff report that sort of indicated that. And the lower floor will be essentially a garage, and then there will be, I believe, a 2-bedroom suite with a deck above that. This is the location of the property, so off of Mosier Place there, kind of adjacent to Pacific Rim Highway, and yeah, one of the strata lots associated with the Rosie Bay development. The proposed garage is shown in the red dashed circle there. So there's essentially it's a panhandle lot as well that comes out, and the proposed garage will be still quite significantly far from all other lot lines, and staff don't feel that'll be intruding on the neighboring properties. However, there will be a larger footprint than is permitted, or that's what's proposed at the moment. So again, reading through the criteria list regarding the form and character of the neighborhood. As the subject property is quite large and the proposed structure is fairly far back from lot lines, staff don't feel that the proposed variance will affect the neighborhood significantly, as it will likely not be very visible, if at all visible, from neighboring properties or from the public realm. And many of the other properties in the area have single-family homes, caretakers' cottages, garages, all of those kinds of things as well. Regarding the protection and preservation of the natural features and functions of the area, there are no development permit areas on the lots, and there will certainly be some clearing of the site associated with a slightly larger footprint. However, staff's, I guess, opinion is that the clearing would probably be taking place anyways if the applicant wasn't allowed to build to this size. And so it shouldn't be, the variance shouldn't cause additional I suppose, clearing or removal of vegetation on the subject property. And then regarding solar exposure, the variance probably should not have much of an effect on solar exposure one way or the other. It's a fairly flat level property, so solar exposure is roughly equal across the entire property. With respect to privacy, it's not anticipated that there will be any sort of intrusion into neighboring properties as a result of the variance. And the same kind of goes for views. This property is actually set back further from the neighboring properties. Staff's understanding is that very little change to existing views will occur. And again, regarding flexibility in building design, the actual structure of the building, there have been plans submitted and you know, essentially close to a building permit submitted for this particular property. So there may be some slight changes to the appearance of the building, but siting will not be permitted to change, or sorry, footprint will not be permitted to change beyond what is being permitted here. Again, the notification went out on June 12th. There were no responses that were received by staff to the notification. Staff are recommending approval. Again, you can refuse the application or defer the application to a later date if that seems appropriate. Thanks. And again, any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Peter. Any questions about this? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if I noticed that the floor plan for the garage includes a bathroom, and I'm just wondering if we have a definition of garage and whether a bathroom can be included. It kind of suggests to me that it might be converted to a dwelling unit at some point. So I'm just wondering if that has any bearing on our decision today. Thanks.
Certainly. So my understanding is that bathrooms are permitted in garages. Garages, in order to be habitable, they need to be built to a certain standard, and those are laid out in the BC Building Code. And it's not uncommon for folks to have a bathroom in their garage. This particular applicant is a builder and a home designer, and that's his rationale for wanting a larger garage, is to be able to store some of his equipment and work down there. So my understanding is that as he'll be working out of there, it's handy sometimes to have a bathroom available. So in order for him to turn it into a habitable dwelling, though, it would have to go through probably another building permit application and would not conform with the zoning at that point. And so I don't think there's any restriction to having a bathroom in a garage. However, he would not be permitted to actually construct it in such a way that would allow, kind of human habitation, at least in the ground floor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Councillor Anderson, why don't you take a shot at this one?
Just get my right screen up here for. Okay. I would move that council approve development variance permit number 0420 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 for strata lot 12, district lot 273, Tla-o-qui-aht District, strata plan VIS 4602 as follows. Vary part 4.1.6B of District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 to increase the allowable footprint of a caretaker's cottage from 70 square meters to 90.1 square meters as shown in Exhibit A to development variance permit number 0420.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Are there any questions, final comments on this? All right, all in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, temporary use permit.
All right, so moving along to consideration of a temporary use permit. This is for the property at 320 Tonquin Park Road. So a fairly large chunk of land. It has been sitting essentially forested and uncleared. And has recently been acquired by a few folks who are looking to potentially build a house there, as well as a caretaker's cottage. It's a group of two couples that have purchased the land within the next year or so. However, prior to that, they're still doing some siting and design work, and so they would like to, one of the groups would like to reside on the property within their RV, and so they're looking for a temporary use permit to permit that. So it's a 1-year TUP is being requested. The applicants have kind of been back and forth with district staff about a variety of development proposals. They're coming close to my understanding of being ready to submit a building permit application. Once they submit a building permit application, there's actually a permission within the zoning bylaw that allows anybody with an active building permit application to live on their property within a recreational vehicle or a trailer, as long as they are actively working on their house and have an open building permit application. However, as they're still working on some design and siting considerations, they actually haven't submitted that building permit application. So they'd like to essentially start living in their trailer a little bit earlier. it's going to be allowing only the owner of the property to reside in the RV and his immediate family. No commercial uses of any sort will be allowed, so it's not a short-term rental or a long-term rental. And the RV is proposed to be hooked up to district sewer and water. And my understanding is that they have been working with the building inspector and public works department to get district sewer and water connected to the property. So a TUP is a tool that just allows a short-term use that doesn't comply with zoning bylaw, and they can sometimes work around or essentially allow uses of other bylaws as well. They can be issued for a maximum of 3 years, and they can be renewed for an additional 3 years. They're essentially intended to be just a temporary thing that allows a short-term use on a property, such as what is being requested. So taking a quick look at the OCP, the property is designated as village. The area is essentially intended for future residential development in a variety of forms and types, and staff don't feel that the proposal has contravenes any sort of OCP policy, especially given the time frame requested of 1 year. Looking at some of the TUP policy we used to evaluate these applications, providing for short-term economic activities. It's not necessarily that the applicant is looking to monetize the property in any way. However, it will allow them to be on the property while they are siting and designing and actually eventually constructing the proposed dwelling. Regarding long-term public policy for the area, the nature of the proposed use is long-term camping, but it's essentially still residential, is generally aligned with OCP policy, and given the time period requested of 1 year, staff don't feel that there'll be any long-term substantial change to public policy for the area for this particular TUP. Regarding public and private interests, the private interest here is that the applicant is able to live on their land in their trailer while they're working on it. There's not a readily identifiable public interest in this situation. However, staff don't feel that the requested use is I guess unevenly balances the public and private interests. It's not as if this is going to be permission of a commercial use on a property that would otherwise not permit it. And regarding maintaining a reasonable level of compatibility with the surrounding development, it's a fairly large property and a fairly small trailer, so staff don't feel that there'll be any major issues with compatibility of the surrounding development. However, we did receive some responses, a few emails as a result of the notification that went out, which we'll get to shortly. Regarding servicing, the RV, as I mentioned, is proposed to be connected to district sewer and water, and the applicant is working with BC Hydro to provide power to the RV. There has been a nuisance condition that's added to the TUP, again, as this TUP would allow just the property owner and no one else really, and then it couldn't be rented to live there. Staff don't feel that there's a huge opportunity for a nuisance. However, there has been that nuisance condition added, as well as the typical nuisance bylaws that the district has in place. Staff feel is a reasonable protection against anything that could potentially happen. So the notification was sent out on June 12th, and it was also published in the Westerly on June 17th. There were 3 emails that were received by staff. One that was generally opposed. There was one that was not necessarily opposed, but kind of speaking to an additional consideration, and one that I guess didn't really care, but was more commenting on the potential for clearing of the property. So looking at the options, council has can approve the permit, or we can approve the permit as amended, deny the permit, or again defer, otherwise deal with the permit. Staff are currently recommending the first option. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Peter. Okay, any questions? Councillor Law.
Peter, thanks for that. Is one of the neighbor who wrote a letter asking for the RV to be moved when the vegetation loses its foliage? What do you, can you speak to that? Is that a possibility? What do you think of that?
Yeah, certainly. The one thing that I would mention with regards to moving the RV deeper into the property is that as the RV is going to be connected to district sewer and water, it may require the applicant to move that sewer and water a little bit further up. That may be happening anyways, depending on where they decide to site their property. So that's the one consideration. But something that could be, I suppose, added to the conditions of the TUP would be that they're required to put some sort of, if the RV is or the trailer is permitted to remain where it's currently sited, which is kind of within the driveway, visible from the road. We could include a condition in the TUP that would request some sort of a buffer between it and the neighboring property, whether that's a simple fence or something like that. Or another option would be to require them to locate it only on a certain part of the property.
Thank you. And currently there's no requirement to cite it at any particular place. There's no marcation on this TUP.
No, yeah, that's correct. So they have it. They've been storing the RV on the property, and I think they would like to leave it where it is, as I think it's on a level area. However, if needed, it could potentially be moved, and that could be something that could be added as a condition in the TUP. Or some that it could be added essentially as a kind of a part of the nuisance condition where the trailer is not readily visible from neighboring properties.
Thank you. Councillor McQuaid.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Can I just ask if the building permit had been obtained and the regular process was followed, where they were putting their trailer on the land as they began to build, would we have any conditions on where that trailer would go in that situation?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think to a certain extent it's a little bit at the discretion of the building inspector, but it is a permitted use within our zoning bylaw, and so once they have a building permit active, they do have the right to essentially put an RV on their property and live in it while they're working on the house or while the house is being constructed.
Thanks for that.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, just sort of a follow-up question to Councillor McQuaid's question. Is the location of the trailer outside of or inside of the normal setbacks? Because if it falls sort of behind the setbacks, it's sort of a non-issue to me. Thanks.
Yeah, I believe it currently is sited outside of the setbacks. It's a fairly large property, and so far they've pushed a driveway into the property to kind of explore some of the siting options that they might have for the future dwellings that they're planning on. And it's currently sitting within basically within the driveway area. That's been pushed approximately halfway into the property on a level area. And so that's my understanding is from looking at the plans for the driveway, they're well outside of their required setbacks. And that's this TUP would be, it would allow the siting of the recreational vehicle, but we would probably look to ensure that that RV is sited outside of the setbacks.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'll move that the staff be authorized to approve the temporary use permit attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report temporary use permit, Reichert 320 Tonquin Park Road, dated June 23rd, 2020 for a period of 1 year.
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final comment or question? All right. Call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. That's everyone. Motion is carried. Okay. Moving along. The Tofino Housing Corporation rezoning, second reading.
Right, so this is a bit of a longer application, although I know Mayor and Council are all quite familiar, particularly in light of the various conversations we've had regarding this application and the presentations from Mr. Scott that have brought everyone kind of up to speed as to what's happening. There are a few, I'll try and move through the initial stuff just to make sure we're all on the same page fairly quickly, and then there are a few considerations that have been, I guess, brought forward by staff at this point However, staff are still very much of the opinion that that second reading should be granted at this particular council meeting. So looking at the background and kind of where we are right now, the application was received on October 9th of 2019. Permission to proceed was granted in January of 2020. First reading was granted in March of this year. As the focus of the development is affordable housing, the application has been brought forward in the queue and is kind of been considered a little bit more quickly than some of the other applications we get that do not have affordable housing components. So the location is 351 Arnett Road, commonly referred to as DL114. It's a fairly large property, and the actual development will be taking part of kind of on the western, sort of a couple acres on the western side of the property. So far, the property is largely forested. There's a cleared area where the community hall is, the bike park, and then it's also part of the open trail network. Proposal, we're looking at a zoning amendment to allow a residential development. We'll have 72 apartment style homes, 3 duplexes with suites. So we're currently at the zoning stage. This is a major part of the full development process. However, we still will be going through subdivision, development permit, building permit, and likely a development variance permit as well. So although rezoning is a major hurdle to get over for projects of this nature, there are still a few other considerations that may come before council before there are actual shovels in the ground on this one. So one of the key components of this particular development is the housing agreement that will essentially ensure its status as a perpetually affordable development. The apartment style homes, the apartment blocks will be certainly under the housing agreement. The duplex units, my understanding is there's a little bit of, I suppose, uncertainty as to how they will finally be considered. However, there's a lot of complexity regarding the funding for these types of projects. And so at this moment, staff understand that duplex units will likely be exempt from the housing agreement, though there may also be resale covenants or things of a similar nature related to those particular properties. Project is going to be constructed and managed by Catalyst Community Developments. They're a nonprofit housing development organization that's partnered with the THC to realize the project. The bylaw allows a little bit of flexibility. It is a comprehensive development zone, which is typically we try to draft them very much according to the plan that's been proposed by the developer. However, we usually like to ensure that there's a little bit of flexibility as things inevitably come up at the construction stage. And there may also be some slight refinements to setbacks at third reading. However, we're hoping to have a pretty solid understanding of exactly what would be going in there by the time this zoning is finished, should it proceed. So here's the architect's rendering of the site plan. Again, this is not super specific. This is not quite at the building permit level. However, it gives a very good understanding overview of what the site plan is proposed to be. There will be a new road built at the intersection of Leighton Way and Peterson Drive that will come onto the subject property, and there'll be 2 major apartment units, the north and south unit, as well as 3 townhouse sites kind of leading into that area. I noted a lot of kind of statements from the vision to action in the staff report. A few that I've chosen to share here. Tofino is comprised of compact and distinct neighborhoods with a diversity of housing forms. We're interested in integrating natural areas and systems, innovative environmental features, energy efficient homes. Amenities and infrastructure really allow for greater walking and biking throughout the community, so active transport is an important piece of the puzzle, as well as certainly a consideration for ecosystems and watersheds in all the development considerations that we undertake. So the official community plan designates the property as village. That designation kind of covers the whole downtown area as well as out towards the Tonkin Beach area. This designation is essentially, the center of Tofino, and it's intended to be the primary institutional, recreational, commercial center of the town. However, in these more outer areas of the village, we often consider it to be the place where more high-density housing developments are encouraged to locate. as we've talked about before, there's a an inherent tension between environmental policies and housing policies. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation, but that's just one of the main things that kind of comes across as we look at the various considerations in the official community plan for a development of this nature. There are 2 development permit areas that impact the property. These development permit areas are not necessarily considerations at rezoning, but they will be, having a development permit will be necessary at both subdivision and development and building permit stages. Just for council's awareness. So the proposed developments will be coming off of Leighton Way and Peterson Drive in approximately the area where my cursor is right now. And there are 2 riparian areas that are quite close to it. So it will be a requirement to get riparian development permits before subdivision and construction. And then the DL114 development permit area covers the entire lot. This development permit area was based off of a previous site plan for the property. Staff are of the opinion that the requirements of the DL114 development permit area will not actually impact or affect, they don't really pertain to this development. So we will still have to obtain that development permit, but staff don't think that there's anything in the DL114 development permit area guidelines that will cause any trouble for this particular development or slow it down in any way. So affordable housing, something that's we talk about a lot. Development is essentially intended to provide affordable or attainable housing to residents of Tofino. Current information that we use to think about affordable housing is based on the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment from 2015. My understanding is that we'll be looking to refresh that report in the next year or 2. Currently, that is kind of our go-to policy or consideration when it comes to thinking about affordable housing. So permanent year-round rental accommodation, a housing category of great need that's been identified in that report, and that's essentially what this development is seeking to provide. So the monthly rental ranges, we've talked about this, I believe, at permission to proceed as well as first reading. I think the take home from this is that the proposed rental fee range is in line or better with the affordable housing need assessment recommendations. So zoning property is currently split zoned between a few different zones. The proposal is located primarily on the existing CD THC1 zone. And the rezoning will essentially cover most of that, as well as a little bit of the A2 zone with a new comprehensive development zone. And this comprehensive development zone will allow the build out of the development that was proposed on the site plan. So here's the existing zoning. You can see the 3 major zones, the THC zone kind of over to the west, the park and public use zone up in the northern part, and then the rest is covered by the A2 zone. And this little blue blob is approximately where the zoning boundaries for the proposed CD zone would land. So getting a little bit deeper into the land use considerations, the applicant provided a comprehensive servicing brief related to the development that's been considered by our engineering department. And then also we kind of undertook another review of the Bunt engineering report regarding traffic. And have that's kind of the bulk of the new part of the staff report pertains to those sorts of things. The Bunt engineering report, as was mentioned at first reading, indicates that there's no issues with traffic flow from the development into the downtown core. The applicant has offered to paint lines to delineate pedestrian infrastructure on Leighton Way. And parking is currently proposed at 1 spot per unit, so that's a total of 84 spaces of parking. The bylaw, although this is a CD zone and we can essentially specify parking as is seen to be necessary, a typical interpretation of the bylaw for a multifamily development in this particular location would specify 1 spot for 1.2 units. So the development actually would only need to provide 70 spaces if we took a very strict interpretation of the zoning bylaw. So staff encouraged, there's a few notes in the staff report about basically parking demand management strategies where possible. The applicants have already done a lot of design work, so it may not be as feasible at this point in the development process as it would have been earlier on in the process, but it's something that staff wanted to flag. Parking is a significant cost as well as a significant footprint aspect of all these kinds of developments. And so in an effort to better support a lot of the environmental policies in the OCP and concerns that have been raised by both council and the public, there may be an opportunity there at the construction stage to permit slightly less parking if the developer sees that it's needed. Staff mostly just want to flag that, moving forward, the consideration of less parking as opposed to more parking, and less parking, not just less parking, but less parking in combination with active transport infrastructure and other potential parking demand management strategies, such as car shares or decoupling parking spots from the actual units. So, maybe there's one of the 3-bedroom units that has a household with 2 vehicles can use one of the spots that would otherwise be reserved for a 1-bedroom unit, where the person who is living in there does not actually have a vehicle and does not require that parking spot, and that could potentially lower certain rents as well. So again, staff understand that at this stage in the development and with the work that's been done by the applicant, it may not be as feasible as it would have been earlier on in the development process, but certainly felt that it was reasonable to flag that just for council's attention. Regarding the proposed road access, the proposed road that comes off the Layton and Peterson intersection, it will almost certainly require a development variance permit prior to subdivision. One of the discussions that staff have been having with the applicant fairly regularly over the past few weeks to months is just kind of our opinion that active transport infrastructure should be prioritized. This development is approximately 10 to 15-minute walk from the sort of core of Tofino and where a lot of people may be employed. And so having good pedestrian pathways as well as cycling infrastructure really lines up with a lot of the OCP goals of kind of environmental considerations, as well as the recently kind of completed multimodal transportation plan goals. So staff are of the opinion, in light of those policies and those goals, that active transport infrastructure should be certainly prioritized along this road. And there are a number of options presented in the staff report regarding kind of the road and different ways that staff could approach this. Just to be very clear about that, these aren't conditions of rezoning in any way. Because this is a fairly complicated development, staff are of the opinion that we want to make sure council is very aware of the things that we're thinking about and the things that will be potentially coming in the next weeks and months. So that's just information that we felt was necessary to share. At this point with the rezoning, really what we're considering is use and density, and the specifics of road design will be typically worked out at subdivision, and if a development variance permit is necessary, that will come back for council's consideration at that point. So servicing brief that was provided was reviewed by district engineering. Fire flows have been deemed acceptable by at least 2 outside consultants. Water servicing has been deemed manageable. However, one thing that staff continue to note is that, particularly with large developments like this, we don't have a very comprehensive understanding of our water system and the exact demands on our water system. So as we start to entertain more and more proposals for larger developments, further and further risk to our water system will be created. And so although water servicing is considered to be manageable based on our current infrastructure, moving forward, and if other sorts of larger residential or commercial, for that matter, developments come forward, it'll be important to work on more comprehensive water management strategies and really understand the pull on our system in order to safely be able to kind of consider those types of applications. So sewer flows and the stormwater discharge plan were deemed acceptable based on the work that's been done by the applicant's landscape architects and civil engineers. So then taking a little bit of a closer look at some of the environmental considerations. As mentioned, there's this tension between environmental goals and housing needs has been mentioned numerous times by public and council. This is what we would call a greenfield subdivision. So it's basically going, or pardon me, a greenfield development. So we're going on to previously undisturbed land and placing structures and roads and things like that in that area. So there's as much as we really would love to be a completely environmental community, there's also the reality of the desire for housing, and that this particular lot is the lot that the district currently owns. and is able to put housing on. So the one thing that I think is important to remember is that the current zoning proposal is actually, in staff's opinion, more environmentally responsible than the existing zoning. The existing zoning actually allows for a fairly considerable build out of that portion of the lot. And the current zoning proposal does exist on a much smaller footprint, though it will still require a loss of vegetation habitat, and there will be development near riparian areas, so fairly sensitive areas, and areas beyond which are well loved by many members of the community. So one of the I guess recommendations in the staff report is that council authorize staff to investigate options for protective measures over other parts of the property. This would not be a condition of the current rezoning. This is just something that staff felt like including in our recommendations in response to the many comments that have been made by both the public and council expressing concern over the environmental costs of this development. So that may be something that council wishes to investigate further. A few of the other land use considerations, things that we've already talked about. Amenity contribution, the staff understand that this will be waived. In essence, the affordable housing that's being provided by the applicant is the amenity that's being contributed to the district. Form and character, there isn't really many considerations within the district lot 114 development permit area for form and character, or many restrictions. So if there are any concerns, it's best dealt with at the rezoning process. The housing agreement, will be entered into by bylaw. Staff anticipate that we'll be bringing it forward quite soon for council's consideration. It'll likely mimic the previous THC housing agreement that was drafted for the property at 700 Sharp Road. The multimodal transportation plan, I've mentioned that before with regards to pedestrian infrastructure. I guess we just want to reiterate that the property does provide great opportunities for cycling and walking and other active transportation to get around the core part of Tofino and to work into many of the I guess errands that are common for folks to run. Through that lens, ensuring that we have adequate active transport infrastructure in association with this development is quite important. Wildlife staff are hoping to work with the applicant in order to ensure that garbage and other attractants are managed appropriately. We are going into a greenfield area where it is historically wildlife habitat, and so we will be certainly needing to consider that as we refine designs and move forward with the project. And then regarding tsunami and flooding, there's really no flooding or tsunami concerns with regards to the property. It's well out of those areas, and the refuge center that's nearest is actually on the same property, which is the community hall. So the options that are before council today are to grant second reading to bylaw number 1279/2020, which is for this new comprehensive development zone. Grant second reading as appended, reject the application, or otherwise deal with the application. As I mentioned at the beginning, staff are recommending the first option at this point. So the next steps, we would move forward to public hearing and then enter into third reading. The housing bylaw would probably also be introduced at that time. Any other agreements, if needed, would be considered. Then we would look to adopt the housing bylaw and adopt this zoning bylaw and move forward with subdivision and any other steps that need to be taken with regards to the development. Thanks for your attention. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm just going to drink some water, but I'm happy to answer any questions or comments as they come forward.
Good, Peter. Thanks very, very much. All right, open it up. Questions? Councillor Steer.
Just a quick comment too. I really want to thank staff for the amount of work that they did once again, and specifically around the further recommendation down about looking at the areas that will be appropriate for protection on district-owned lands. It shows that they're being quite proactive and have listened to the community and to council regarding these matters. So I just would like to applaud staff on that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. Councillor Law.
Thank you, Peter. It's a lot of work. I appreciate it. Can you just talk about, I know that Ian talked about working about the road. Now, I was looking on there, the multimodal transportation plan, and there was staff identified 4 options for moving forward. And I just wanted to, if you could talk about what you had reached an agreement with the THC or Catalyst about the road, Leighton Way, Arnett Road, and a crosswalk. Is that what that was?
Sorry, are you referring to option 4 at the moment, I think?
Yeah, option 4. I just, in Ian's presentation, he said that you guys had come to an agreement on the road.
I'm not sure. I might have missed the context of Ian's statements in his presentation.
I think it was rather that there's been a lot of discussion about this, but this isn't part of the use and density part of the rezoning application, and it will still, there's still more discussion to be had and leeway there.
Yeah, so I would echo Mayor Osborne's comment. That sort of information is mostly at this point provided for council's kind of awareness. As I mentioned, because it's a fairly large development that we're considering, staff feel that it's worthy of bringing these things forward early, so that everybody's things are fairly open and transparent. We're all on the same page. Currently, the proposed road it doesn't quite match up with one of the subdivision bylaw standards. However, that's really it's kind of a little bit out of the scope of the rezoning, and what we'd be mostly focusing on that at subdivision stage. So that was the development variance permit that I've mentioned a couple of times. And if it comes to the point where the road that's proposed does need a development variance permit, that will come back to council for their consideration. And at that point, it's likely that staff will have a few different options for council to consider in terms of lane widths and those types of things. I'm hesitant to start getting into the weeds a little bit too much at this point, but that is something that it is something that essentially the applicant and staff have had numerous conversations about, and we just, as staff, we just want to ensure that there is not only adequate vehicle infrastructure, but also adequate pedestrian, cyclist, and other active transport infrastructure as well. And I think that within the proposed right-of-way and what we're looking at, we certainly have room to do that.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions? Councillor Anderson, and then we'll come back to Councillor Law.
No questions, but just a comment that so much work has gone into this, and I'm really glad to see we're finally getting to this stage. So it's one of the things that has been particularly something I've been fond of over the years, moving along with this and trying to get some housing there. So I'm really glad to see all the work that's gone into it, both by staff and the extensive back work that has been done, all the attached appendixes really speak to that. So yeah, it's great that we're here now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Law.
This is a question about the authorizing staff to conduct a review. Do we discuss the environmental options for that review now, or how does that work?
No, that'll come later. And it's a separate process to the rezoning. So I just want to be really clear. I know that this motion is written as a 3-part motion. That third part is important. And as has already been stated, it's clearly a reflection of concerns that council and the public have had, but it is a separate process. And so if we pass that part of the motion, then our staff will be, will initiate that process and bring it to council when they can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Anderson.
When we look at the recommendation, it's 3 parts. I'm just wondering if we should move all 3 parts together. I kind of see the first 2 moving and then the third one maybe considered separately.
I agree. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that it's just more clear for the public record too. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no other questions, and I certainly want to echo the thanks that are being expressed here for the incredible amount of work this has taken. And I'm very ready to see this move forward to public hearing and get into the next stages of the process. So thank
Well, I'd
you.
be happy to move
Please.
the first two parts then of the recommendation.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw 1279-2020 be read a second time, and that council authorize the manager of community sustainability to schedule a statutory public hearing for the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1279-2020.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor McMaster. All right, any final comment on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. That's passed. And go ahead, Councillor Anderson. Oh, you're just unmute yourself there.
There we go. Okay, I would further move that staff be authorized to conduct a review of those district-owned lands outside of the proposed development and to make recommendations to council for areas appropriate for environmental protection through zoning, covenants, or other means.
Thank you. Moved, seconded by Councillor Law. All right, any discussion on this motion at this time? All right, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. All right. Well, Peter, how's your voice?
I'm doing all right. I got one more. I'll try and short and sweet is what I'll try and make it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this is another zoning amendment application for the property at 61 4th Street. It's recently been consolidated. It used to be 2 lots and now it has been 1. This amendment has come before council before. However, there's been some significant changes to the design and application since that time, and so staff are presenting this report as a permission to proceed report. So a little bit of background: application was received on March 20th, 2018. There was some updated received last November. A permission to proceed was granted on June 26th of 2018, but the proposal has changed since that time, and there's been some more communication with the applicant and the applicant's agents. So again, we're kind of presenting this report as a permission to proceed report. So the location of the property, this is actually an older map. It shows 410 Main Street and 61 Main Street, or 61 4th Street, pardon me. However, these lots have since been consolidated into 61 4th Street. So the proposal is essentially to locate 2 new buildings on the subject property adjacent to Main Street. This would be on the property has a fairly significant slope from Main Street down towards the waterfront, and so these 2 new buildings would be on top of the slope, essentially adjacent to Main Street. There'd be 12 dwelling units between the 2 buildings, and these would provide staff accommodation for CERMAC. There's also the potential for ground floor commercial uses. My understanding is that when this proposal was first brought before council, there was some talk about potentially having a bit more of a mixed use kind of portion to the development, and that is in line with many of the OCP policies. So staff are the opinion that having ground floor commercial uses may be a benefit to the overall development. Further, the existing dwelling would be removed, and the zoning boundaries would be adjusted as needed. So here's basically a bit of a rendering that's been provided by the applicant's architect to show approximately what they predict the development would look like. Just off screen to the left is essentially Anchor Park, and then this sort of street that you can see fading off screen is actually on the CERMAC property and moves down towards the waterfront. And this is just past, beyond the parking lots that are behind the municipal hall. So here's a bit of a site plan or kind of floor plan for the proposal. To the left would be a slightly larger structure, and then to the right would be a slightly smaller structure. My understanding is that any commercial uses would be likely within the larger structure on the left-hand side of the screen or left side of the image. So taking a brief look at some of the overall policies that help guide our decisions with regards to these applications. Vision to Action talks about buildings kind of combining Tofino's eclectic character, but also protecting natural amenities and viewscapes, and that's something that's very important within this downtown area is actually the design. This is one of the areas of Tofino where we actually have fairly comprehensive design guidelines within our development permit area. Diversity of housing forms is available throughout the community. Housing is healthy and affordable, and Tofino has a unique and strong local economy comprised of arts, culture, etc., and includes tourism, fishing, and aquaculture. So the official community plan, this property is within the village designation within the downtown area. In this particular area, mixed use infill development is promoted, particularly residential over commercial. As well as kind of a bit of densification as well. Some of the other kind of considerations with regards to waterfront areas regard the waterfront area as a working harbor, but it's very important to protect viewscapes and protect the relationship between the land and the sea and the public realm and the water. Staff housing is also widely supported throughout the OCP. The downtown vitalization plan also applies to this particular application, and it has a little bit more focused design considerations for the downtown area, particularly Main and Campbell Street. And it talks a lot about north-south building orientation, building widths limited to 120 feet, and maximum building heights of 2 to 2.5 stories. And a lot of these kinds of things are to preserve those viewscapes that were previously mentioned. Affordable housing needs assessment, again, the permanent year-round accommodation is a major category of need. Approximately $700 to $1,600 a month rental price range, and those are adjusted for 2019. I don't know if we actually have the proper information to adjust them for 2020, but they'd be very close to that. Staff anticipate that a housing agreement for the units would be a requirement of rezoning to ensure that they remain within the target range. And the proposal is in line with a lot of affordable housing needs assessment goals, which would be to provide permanent year-round rental accommodation and staff accommodation. Zoning, so the property is currently split zoned between R2, which is a duplex residential zone, and W2, which is an industrial waterfront, so kind of a working harbor designation. The proposal would involve rezoning the R2 area and a portion of the W2 area that's on top of the slope. Into this new CD zone that would permit the uses described, and the lower waterfront area of the property would remain W. So we're talking about a significant increase in density. There'd be a change to the form and character, setbacks would be adjusted, and then there may be the additional commercial use at ground level. So here's a brief map of the current zoning. The property kind of has this R2 zone that is adjacent to Main Street and follows sort of the lower area of the slope. And then there actually a significant part of the property is also associated, or the work that goes on the property is also associated with foreshore leases. So the proposed zoning would essentially see the top portion, I guess kind of the southern portion of the property would be rezoned to the CD zone area. This would be between Main Street and the top of the slope, and then the rest of the property would remain W2 zone. So a few of the initial planning considerations that staff are considering with this application. So the design that's being proposed is not consistent with vitalization plan policies or DPA requirements specifically for height. The proposal is, I believe, over 14 meters and 3 stories. So that's going to be a conversation. I think staff are very in favor of the use, but the actual design is going to be a bit of a conversation with the applicant if we are to move forward with this application. Parking, again, we need to ensure that it's integrated well with the streets. They've done a significant amount of design work already, and we just need to make sure that it meets the minimum requirements and that they're not relying on public parking to service this development. Slopes, there are some significant slopes, as have been mentioned, so it's likely that some geotechnical engineering work will need to be done. It'd be nice to have that at the rezoning stage, just to understand that the development rights that we could potentially be granting will actually be relevant for this particular property. Servicing, again, this is a significant increase in density for the property, so a servicing brief will likely be required prior to second reading. The multimodal transportation plan talks a lot about trying to have development in areas that is very easily accessible through active transportation routes. This is essentially right downtown, and so it would eliminate a lot of the reasons people get in their cars, to go grocery shopping or to go to a restaurant or those kinds of things. So many of the MMTP goals kind of mesh nicely with this kind of densification. The street in front of the property along Main Street has recently had a lot of work done to it. One of the things that would be kind of, I guess, important to consider with this development is to ensure that whatever kind of frontage improvements or things happen on the property, that they flow well with the existing design of Main Street. Community amenity contribution policy would apply to this particular application. And then also just the viability of commercial uses. I mean, that's something that seems applicable to that particular area, but it is definitely a change in use from the existing zoning. So also something worthy of consideration should the application move forward. So taking a quick look at some of the flooding and tsunami information that we've recently been gathering here at the district. The lower portion of the property is certainly at risk, but due to that steep slope, the area that's currently kind of being considered for residential development appears to be largely out of the area. Again, this will be probably an important aspect of any geotechnical studies that are done or any geotechnical work that is done, is to ensure that the slope is stable, but also that's whatever is being constructed has a significant resistance to any sort of flooding or tsunami that could occur on the property. So the options at this point: grant permission to proceed with the application, deny the application, or defer, otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending that we proceed with the application. There's still some considerations to work out before we really start drafting a bylaw, particularly around design, but the overall use and intention, staff are in support of. So the next steps, probably like I mentioned, further discussion with the applicant, preparation of the bylaw, first reading, referrals, and then eventually trying to work our way towards second reading. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Peter. Okay. Any questions? Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Peter, once again. I will be in support of the permission to proceed here. I just had a couple of questions, and I just want to reiterate that your report does identify some of the aspects that were of concern, especially around the height and considerations and the form and character, as you had alluded to. So they are certainly on my mind moving forward as to considerations along that Main Street section. I did have a question, Peter, in terms of the commercial uses. I don't know if there's been any indication as what businesses might be in there, but in that CD zone, eventually would the types of commercial uses be prescriptive that we would implement, or is it a fairly broad, open commercial use in those facilities?
I anticipate that it would be probably somewhere in between. Like, we would probably be fairly prescriptive in what we would permit, say things like a retail store or a coffee shop, but it would probably be based on nearby zones. So there's, I believe some there's a C2 zone across the street and some other things. So it'd be probably very much in line with what's already permitted in the area, should we go that route. So it would be fairly prescriptive, but with a little bit of room to wiggle in between, mostly retail stores or small coffee shop kinds of things, I would imagine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Questions? Comment? Councillor Law.
Just a quick comment, Peter. Thank you for this, for all your work on this. And I do just want to let you know that I concur with some of the concerns that you've had and outlined: height, orientation, design. That's all.
I'll be sure to pass that on to the applicant in our discussions.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Turn your attention to the motion then.
I'll move that staff proceed with further review of zoning amendment application for 410 Main Street and 61 4th Street.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final comment, question? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. And I just want to do a little time check here. It's 20 after 6. We have a few more reports left. Do you want to take a short break, or everyone's okay for now? Okay, great. Then we'll move on to secondary suites. Thanks, Erin.
Hello, I'm just going to share my screen with you 1 second. You have the screen. I'm just going to share myself with you. Oh my goodness. Just give me a second here. I guess I'm giving you the break that you decided you didn't need. My apologies.
Is your screen frozen?
No, I minimized it, and I'm just trying to get my camera back.
Oh, see, because we can see it, but it just looks like it's frozen.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. You guys can see that, eh?
I can see it, yeah, but your mouse is moving.
All right, I'm going to go through this the best I can.
Do you want to unscreen share it and then try again?
Yeah,
that might help.
That's the problem is I'm not being able to get to the maximum screen size, so I can't unshare because I don't have the option right now.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the side there is just a little too small to read.
Yeah, I'm frozen up here. Do you guys want to give me, maybe I'll just phone in and come back in again? I'm sorry.
Yep, no, that's okay.
Let's
just take a 2-minute break if everybody's okay with that. Okay, thanks.
I'll get going. I have 2 very short presentations for council today. The first is a zoning amendment proposal for secondary suites. And the recommendation is for council to authorize staff to look further into the matter, so there's no bylaw in front of council today. Recently, and I mean recently in the last year, there were some changes to the BC Building Code regarding secondary suites. These are technical changes, so they're more related to building and safety than they are to land use. But if we want to adopt these changes, we would need to make a zoning bylaw amendment. Our zoning bylaw, like many zoning bylaws in British Columbia for secondary suites, reflects what's actually in the BC Building Code. It's the provisions are copied from that, and so our current bylaw has provisions of secondary suite that match up with the previous regulations in the code. In terms of other policy that would support this, the OCP provides a number of policies which suggests this is something that we may want to look into and would not require an OCP amendment. The benefits are outlined in the report. The province also provides some information about that. In the end, we're looking at potentially being able to provide more rental units in different types of buildings, in different zones. We may look towards increased safety of secondary suites and of suites that may decide that they want to move into the legal realm. It's a way to increase density in a low impact type of way, in the sense that where suites weren't previously permitted, they may be permitted, and we may be able to add some density to existing neighborhoods without affecting character. And again, it would allow it for different types of structures and zones. So that's the good stuff, but these things are always more complicated than they look. And so what staff would be doing if we move forward, this would be ensuring that the areas that we put these in are areas that we want more people to be in. And we think a lot about flooding and tsunami and floodplain. the conversation about risk mitigation and whether it's a good idea to keep putting people into that area. We would talk about how that would intersect with our tertiary dwelling work, about what kind of implications it would have for short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts, infrastructure and servicing implications. If we're going to be densifying areas, what does that mean in terms of our existing services? The density form location are always stuff we look at zoning. Affordability and the ability to provide housing covenants may be something we look at, and as well as just sort of gauge what the community or the builder interest is on this. And that's, so if we move forward, these are the types of things that staff will be exploring. And so again, the recommendation is that staff be authorized to draft a zoning bylaw amendment to address recent changes to the British Columbia Building Code with respect to secondary suite regulations. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Are there any questions? Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Steer.
I'm not sure what sort of workload this would bring on, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that. And I'm just wondering if it's something that should, aren't we somewhere halfway or further than halfway getting through our OCP update? And would this be sort of part of that, or would it be something we do after or concurrently? So that's my question.
Thank you. Great question. It could happen. It could happen. It basically, this is we understand as this is potentially an important aspect of affordable housing in the District of Tofino, dealing with existing stock. And as new development comes online, the ability to provide those secondary suites. For example, if the zoning gets in place by the time the Tofino Housing Corporation goes to build, there may be options for them in their townhouses to add secondary suites, adding units. So I think it's important enough, and I don't think it's that complicated. We'll have to do a little bit of work, but we have the benefit of having a fairly small town, and we understand it quite well. So I can't promise you this is going to be at the top of the list, but it definitely can be on the list. In between, we often find like an hour or two in our day between meetings or other work that it can be inserted in. So I'm hesitant to give you a timeline, but it's definitely something that we can accommodate.
Thank you. Just mindful of what we're taking on. That's all. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Steer?
Yeah, thank you. Part of it was answered by Councillor Anderson's question. I just wanted to reiterate, and you laid it out quite well and very supportive of moving this, Aaron, in your considerations. And one of them, of course, is the intent of this. I'm sure is to provide that the housing options in our community, and one of the implications may be around the short-term rental questions that often come up. And I would just reiterate to be very mindful of that, as I'm sure you're well aware. Thank you.
Great, and thanks for that. I really appreciate that being mentioned, and definitely something that we'll take a look at.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I'll move that staff be authorized to draft a zoning bylaw amendment to address recent changes to the British Columbia Building Code with respect to secondary suite regulations.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions, thoughts? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, Aaron, shipping containers. Oh, just before you start, Councillor Anderson is going to.
Yeah, I want to, or I will be, declaring a conflict of interest. Both of my businesses and leases I hold are on properties that make some use of shipping containers, and I believe I'm in conflict because of that. So I will leave the meeting.
Okay.
Texted.
We will call you back when we are done this item. Thank you. Okay. All right, Aaron, take it away. Except you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Peter just came to tell me that he was playing Zoom bingo and let me know I was losing. Sorry. So this is zoning amendment. Does have a bylaw reading attached to it for first reading. It is bylaw 1287, and again, this presentation will be fairly brief. The background to this proposal came through the work we were doing on the OCP, particularly in terms of form of character and containers. And through that work of exploring containers in relation to the OCP, staff became aware of safety issues about containers and the research other communities were doing. We've also, over the last number of years, received a number of complaints from the community about it. And so as an offshoot to the work we were doing on form and character, staff thought it was prudent to bring this forward to council, primarily because of the safety, but also because it is something that has some issues within the community. The first thing, and probably the one thing to remember throughout this, is that absent a building permit, a container is not a building. It's a shipping container, and it's not something that's addressed in the BC Building Code or zoning or anything else at this point. So the reason we're not looking at this as the BC Building Code is because it's not a building. Currently, the zoning bylaw permits accessory buildings for things like garages and sheds, greenhouses. Our intent is to include shipping container specifically into that area of the zone. We understand that containers are being used primarily at this time for storage and workshops. The ones that have occupancy, such as Tin Whisks, the container development Tin Whisks, or the market at the end of Campbell Street, are actually buildings now because they went through a process to get a building permit. And so the proposal in front of council today is not to deal with those types of building, that type of shipping container that have a building permit. It's only to deal with ones that are being used for storage and workshops. We looked at two different ways of dealing with containers. The first thing we thought about was whether it's something that needed to be banned because of some of the safety issues that are being faced by that the district may face in terms of explosion and safety of first responders. But looking to that, starting to take a look at that in a bit more detail, quite soon realized that we need a significant amount of legal advice, that the cost may be prohibitive not only for legal advice, but if we intended to remove them, and that in the end it may be kind of an overreactive solution. And so what we've settled on and what our recommendation is today is that we just regulate these through the zoning bylaw. And again, that would ensure consistency as well as address any safety concerns with this type of structure and use. So that brings us to the recommendation that District of Tofino Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1287/2020 attached as Appendix 1 to the report entitled Zoning Bylaw Amendment Shipping Containers dated June 23rd, 2020 be introduced and read a first time. And following, if this moves forward today, the next steps for council or for staff would be to engage the wider community and stakeholders and get their feedback on the proposed zoning amendment, and then subsequent to that, bring that back to council, potentially with amendments, potentially not, for second reading. So that is it for that presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Aaron. I definitely am thinking of Dorothy because it was discussions that she brought to the council table that initiated this whole process here. But I appreciate how your investigation into some of the form side of things has caused you to also look at some of the other issues. And I definitely understand that there's a number of local governments that are looking at this right now, and in fact in the middle of making changes such as the one that you're recommending that we consider. Are there any questions about this report from members of council? There are no questions. Then that must mean it was a good report and clear. And would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll move.
Sure, I'll move the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1287/2020, attached as Appendix 1 to the report titled Zoning Bylaw Amendment Shipping Containers dated June 23rd, 2020, be introduced and read a first time.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions, comments? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, so I think it's Elise's turn now to speak to us about public hearing procedures. Thanks, Elise.
I've just invited Councillor Anderson to join us, so
Oh, right. Thank you.
We'll just give him a second.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll set up my screen. Can you tell me what you see if you are seeing?
Full screen.
Okay, great. Just making sure. And Councillor Anderson is back. Okay. Good afternoon. This report is to present a recommendation that staff be directed to create a process for in-person public hearings. And the context of this report is the provincial state of emergency. And with that provincial state of emergency came a few different orders. We've seen many, and the two that have really postponed the public hearing process in Tofino were the provincial order prohibiting gatherings of more than 50 people and 2-meter physical distancing requirements. So this has impacted us due to the facilities that we have in Tofino. And I just want to take a step back for one moment to discuss the distinction between public hearings and council meetings, because you might be wondering, why would we be recommending a process that's different from what we're doing today, which is all electronic? So on March 26th, there was a ministerial order that allowed electronic meetings, and by the next meeting, we had all of council on Zoom. However, that order did not include public hearings, which is a very separate process, and participation in council meetings, as we've seen today, through the public comment period and delegations, that's facilitated at designated points on the meeting agenda by council's own meeting procedure bylaw, and it's not included in legislation. However, a public hearing, like I said, is a distinct process and is governed by legislative requirements and rules and procedures, including the opportunity to be heard by making oral or written submissions, and the opportunity to comment on or rebut other submissions. And there is a variety of case law that we look to, including the legislation, to guide our processes in these situations. So to summarize, public hearings are a distinct process that requires distinct facilities to allow public participation, and there is considerable risk to decisions made by council should the process of a public hearing be challenged. So the options that staff began to investigate are guided by looking to other jurisdictions, looking at the legal advice that has been put out by various municipal law firms, as well as the province. And I have 4 different options here today, and we'll go through them one by one. So electronic or hybrid meetings, that would be the case where someone could join electronically, such as we're doing today, but they could, or in a hybrid meeting, we could hold it in a space that allowed for physical distancing, as well as have people join remotely. The requirements of this and where this is done successfully is typically in larger municipalities, or just any municipality that has a well-oiled machine, call it, of AV technology as well as expertise in-house. We have, unfortunately, neither of those things right now, but we are looking to improve the the audio-visual technology, pardon me, in the council chamber. However, the council chamber does not provide sufficient space for physical distancing. And so that is the requirement of an in-person meeting, would be to find a space that allows for physical distance and participation protocols that meet the public health orders of the provincial government. There's also an option to waive hearings, and this continues to be an option regardless of the COVID-19 situation or not, and continues also to be recommended by many municipal solicitors and the province and professional organizations. But keeping in mind that we cannot waive public hearings in all situations, this does not apply to an official community plan amendment or a zoning amendment that is not in line with the official community plan. when we choose to waive public hearings, we are also still required to comply with the statutory notice requirements for waived public hearings. And this may be an option, whichever procedural route we choose to go. These are the municipal facilities that we have currently, and they are the council chamber, and we have done an OH&S review of all of our facilities, and it does not allow for more than 10 people. So unfortunately, the council chamber is not an excellent space to be holding public hearings for the public. And we are improving the AV technology, and we hopefully will be having council meetings in the space together, again, without the presence of the public, to ensure the safety of everyone involved. The community hall, however, is the ace in our sleeve, and it is a capacity of 48 people and provides plenty of space for physical distancing. However, there is no audiovisual technology currently at the community hall. So we have these two spaces. One allows for physical distancing, one allows for technology, and we cannot have both, try as we might right now. Just what I said. So if council were to consider the motion that is recommended today, staff would prepare a set of procedures that would allow for an in-person public hearing process to take place at the community hall. And the considerations that we would look into for that kind of process include a regular oral and written submission process to ensure that everyone has access, as well as occupancy load, entrance and egress, washroom access, screening procedures for anyone who enters the building, signage, all of the regular stuff that someone who runs a business might have to do for their COVID-19 plan. And to ensure the communication and accessibility of these in-person procedures, we would look at lengthening the amount of time for someone to submit a written submission. So we could have a computer available for someone to email in their submission right up to the end of that public hearing. Whereas right now we do have a more restrictive deadline because you can come in person. I'm happy to answer any questions. And also just note that we have had a new ministerial order that does apply to council meetings. And so we will be coming forward with a little more explanation about how we can ensure the accessibility and transparency of council meetings as per that order. That's it.
Thank you. All right, questions? Councillor Steer.
Just a quick question, fully support moving this forward. I was just curious if Elise, you might want to speculate if this might be able to move forward fast enough for the public hearing that will be scheduled for, for the Tofino Housing Corporation zoning amendment.
Yes, that is our intention. So currently we have no process for a public hearing, and we will need one quite quickly. So we, yes, we hope to work with the community hall and develop those procedures right away.
Thank you. Councillor McMaster?
Could the AV and the new AV equipment that we're getting to council chambers be used in the community theatre?
The way that we're having it installed, and you know, I haven't confirmed whether it's that portable, but I believe it's going to be mounted. So the camera would be in a fixed position mounted to the wall. That's the way I understand it right now, as well as the microphones. And so the audio component is actually quite a tricky part to integrate into the system. But I don't have a firm answer on that, and I can certainly look into it.
Okay.
The challenge with the community hall or the theater, of course, is physical distancing. So if we were to hold anything in there, the same challenges apply in terms of physical distance.
Thank you. Councillor Law.
I'm in support of this. Fully just wondering if the for those people who are most vulnerable, you know, over 70, is there any way to accommodate them, especially, or would that detract from the overall?
Do you mean in terms of mobility or in terms of hearing, or both?
Just in terms of access, you know, like I was just thinking if somebody over 70 was especially vulnerable for COVID, you know, these are COVID restrictions, would have, you know, to lessen the chance that they, you know, would feel excluded because they're extra vulnerable. Is there any options, like, you know, opening it an hour early for people over 70 or with the condition?
Unfortunately, the public hearing does have to be accessible to everyone at the same time, but the written submission component is really designed for those people who feel that they are not comfortable coming to a public space. And so that is top of mind, especially with the council meetings as well as public hearings, the accessibility to those who feel vulnerable to show up in a public space, but as well as the accessibility of those who don't have access to a computer. We're balancing these needs all the time, and it's certainly top of mind, and we'll try to reach that population as best we can to explain the options available to them.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Elise. Anyone else? Councillor Anderson?
I believe it's possible also to adjourn a public hearing and then start it again the next day or at another time. So if we do get to a point, I think, where we have more than 48 people that want to participate, we might want to consider that as an option as well, for well-attended public hearings. That's my suggestion.
Yes, that is definitely a practice.
Thank you. Yes, that will be included in the procedures for the motion that must be passed, and then you would direct us to adjourn the public hearing to another date and place so that everyone knows where they can show up again. And we can hold public hearings outside. There are numerous options if we can cross that bridge when we get to it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I'll move that staff be directed to develop new procedures in order to hold in-person public hearings at the Tofino Community Hall in accordance with the orders of the Provincial Health Officer.
Thank you. Moved and seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any final questions, comments on this? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, so now we have the audit committee, which met and reviewed the audited financial statements for the district. And first of all, we have the minutes from the audit committee to receive. And let us do that, and then we'll hear from Nyla.
I'll move receipt.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, Nyla.
Thank you. So we held an audit committee meeting, and the audit committee received a thorough presentation from the auditor regarding the 2019 financial statements. Typically, these are coming to council and the audit committee much earlier, but given the circumstances this year, we've received an extension to get our audited financial statements completed and our annual reporting done. So we haven't missed any deadlines, but today before you are the audited financial statements for 2019. I don't have a formal presentation today. One was provided to the audit committee. I would like to note that there is one change to the statements as they have been included in the agenda package. On note 8, with respect to restricted revenues on page 19 of the financial statements, not the agenda package, of the financial statements, there is a table in that note, and for the amenities fund, the revenue number and the interest earned number need to be reversed. So the statements could still be approved today with that change. The numbers were just switched around, and I didn't notice that until it was already included in the agenda package. So the recommendation could be modified to be that the 2019 audited financial statements be approved with a change to note 8, reversing the interest earned and revenue amount referenced for the amenities fund.
Thank you very much. So first of all, any questions from anybody about the statements? Okay. If there are none, then I'll move that the 2019 audited financial statements be approved with the change to note 8, reversing the interest earned and revenue amount referencing the amenities fund.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right, final opportunity. Any questions? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. All right, thank you. And thank you again, Nyla, to you and your team for a huge amount of work. All right, and so moving on. Under business from council members, I have a very short report coming from the last recovery task force meeting, which was the first joint recovery task force meeting in which we merged the community health and the economic recovery task forces. And so it was a little bit of a longer meeting because we had a few more voices and a lot of material to move through. We did a very thorough review of the recovery action plan, looking at the items kind of one by one and doing updates through them. And I just want to also draw your attention and the public's attention to the fact that a summary of these meetings are posted on the district's website, and you can see the recovery action plan and its updates at any time on the district's website as well under the COVID-19 tab. So we, one of the things that we had extensive discussion about at this particular task force meeting was around the use of data, occupancy data and capacity data for visitation, and the difference between these two types of data, what they mean and how they could relate or be correlated to hospital volume or impact on the local healthcare. And it is something that actually we've spoken about quite a bit in the past, but we have never come to a place where we're able to adequately collect that data and do it in a way where we actually could derive something useful from it. And I think that'll be an ongoing discussion, but it's certainly something that's been also in the public sphere, right, a lot, you know, talking about occupancy and the relationship to the hospital. We had, as you saw earlier, because there was a report, the task force did recommend that the $5,000 from the council grant process be repurposed to the neighborhood small grant program. And so council made that decision today. And we also had quite a bit of discussion around some of the differences between the pace of recovery amongst our communities, and especially between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And one of the discussions and recommendations that came out of the task force was to initiate more discussion directly with the nations themselves. And so that actually has occurred today and yesterday, where meetings took place with some task force members and the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation and with the Acknowledgement First Nation, in addition to having a few extra members of the business community on the calls to really hear and listen and acknowledge the concerns that are coming forward from First Nations. As well, discussion around housing for persons who might become ill or need to isolate, and again, just discussing the role of local government versus the role of island health in this. And this led to another spin-off meeting, I guess I'll call it, between a small subset of district staff and island health staff, including Dr. Paul Hasselback, the medical health officer, in which I think a lot of things were clarified around response, health response, and what would happen in the case of a visitor or a local staff person, local resident becoming ill, testing positive, or just needing to isolate. So these discussions that we're now having every 2 weeks, they continue to be a really good source of ironing out some of these uncertainties that we have, and being able to more effectively plan for things that might happen. We also are going to be receiving the results of the economic survey that was done for organizations, for employers, and have a chance to discuss that in detail soon. So that's it. I'm going to look to Councillors Steer and McQuaid to see if you had any other comments you wanted to bring forth from the task force meeting. Okay. And then ask anyone if there are any questions that come from that. All right. Okay. And then in that case, that concludes our meeting today, and the open portion. I don't see anything in the Q&A, which means I would ask somebody to read the motion to move into the closed session, please.
I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91I of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to discussions with municipal officers and employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purpose of preparing an annual report under section 98, annual municipal report.
Thank you. That is moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried.